Please welcome Tobi Lütke and Andrew Bialecki.
Hello, everyone. How is everyone doing? Having a good day, I hope? All right. I was looking forward to this. This is going to be real fun. Okay, if I would be more prepared, I would know exactly where to start. So, now I'm kind of relying on you a little bit. What is the best conversation we could possibly have? I wonder.
Tobi, first you got to tell us.
A million topics we could dig into.
Yeah, well, Shopify's turned 20. I mean, Klaviyo's only 12. How does it feel to be 20 years old as a?
It's I don't know. It doesn't feel like this. This is so crazy, right? It's like honestly, just let's not make this about this, but I keep getting in this situation where I'm like, this feels like yesterday. Like there's like a tunnel that you can go to. I think it's like available to everyone. Sort of going through the various years of Shopify's milestones, and they found some remarkable artifacts from this time. On the wall, on one place, they literally have the command I typed into my Apple laptop, like the rsync command, because back in the day, like pedestrians, we rsynced the code up to the server. And they still have a command there. And I just I stare at this, and first of all, it's correct. Second, I feel like I wrote that yesterday. It just feels like only a second ago. I don't know, 12 years is a serious time as well. How does it feel for you?
Yeah. Well, we have this in our office. We kind of model it like a big university lecture hall.
Very cool.
And one of the things we do is, obviously for a lot of us, like Black Friday, Cyber Monday, the holidays are big. So when we get to Monday, we have this tradition now of every year we hang a new banner. Klaviyo is a Boston company, Boston, the U.S., big sports town. So we're like, oh, we should have rafters but anyways, the banners every year, we used to design like a new logo. So our creative team will come up with one. But the old years, it was just my co-founder and I. And so Ed used to design, he designed the original Klaviyo logo. And so the old flags have these terrible Klaviyo logos that we designed in Photoshop. So ours, maybe not rsync, but there's some crappy Photoshop files of the first iteration. So we look at those every day.
I am in a lot of product reviews and a lot of UX reviews, and we are making very deliberate choices to the chunkiness of the buttons and so on. And eventually, when the team is really sick of my requests, someone just pulls up the very first Shopify logo and says, Tobi, you approved at some point this one, so therefore clearly you don't know what you're talking about. So we are done here. So it's like the I win button of Shopify's UX team. So humble beginnings somewhere. And now, of course, everyone's going to look up the first Shopify logo, which just adds to the embarrassment. So that's not. But this was a very, very dumb talk track by me.
I think it's definitely a mark of a successful tech company if you have these early logos that really were really not great. I don't know, the original Twitter logo, it wasn't even the whole word. It was the kind of bubbly, skeuomorphic, font. And it's okay, we've cleaned that up a bunch. Yeah.
All right, so how, where did Klaviyo come from? What is the first line of code you wrote? So what's the first, give us a sort of inception moment here.
Well, so I don't know if you've had this experience. So the advice I give to a lot of entrepreneurs is, it's great to go to a company that's very entrepreneurial, that sets people up, where they'll give you a big goal and really probably. I was talking to an early engineer, a couple weeks ago, and he's like, "Man, I can't believe how much responsibility you gave us in the early days." It's yeah, well, somebody had to go build that and run that system. But anyways, so I did that for a couple of years, and then when we started, I was asking you. It's for us, it was. I remember I was working at a startup, and the startup was not going to work out. I had the discussion with the CEO, and he's like, Andrew, I need you to not get paid for the next few months. And I was like, ooh, that's not usually a sign of imminent success. So, I cornered my co-founder and said hey, look, I'm gonna quit my job, but I guess technically it wasn't a job anymore. On December 31st, and January 1st, we're gonna rock and roll. And and then, I don't know, we started Klaviyo as, my background was kind of in more on the infrastructure database side. And I'd always had this, I think we now with LLMs and AI, this feels more real, but I'd always had this belief that we were going to be able to take ourselves and kind of clone the logic that we use to decide how we're going to interact with the world. And we were gonna be able to take that and put it in a server and then connect that server to the internet. Because I looked at it as like, early social media was all about sharing text and images, and then you get YouTube with like video. And I was like, okay, but what's the next primitive? And it's like, well, what if it could just be us? And so, I think I thought that it's like, look, I could probably connect ourselves if we can encode enough of the rules that we use. But anyways, to do that, like you had to build like, well, how do you simulate a brain? And that's like really, that's a fascinating topic, right? Is a neural net the right way to do it? That's the way evolution's done it, but like we have these other data primitives, like what's the best way to construct this? So that was, kind of Ed and I's obsession in the early day. And then, I think a lot of folks know Klaviyo for, marketing. One of our first customers, we were just kind of a query engine. I was like, well, what are you doing with the outputs of the query? I mean, they must go somewhere. And they said, we're using it for marketing. We said, okay, well, in the world of software, there's infrastructure layer and there's the application layer. And, we looked at it and we're like, okay, well, infrastructure is kind of hard to sell because you're one level removed. So if we could build an application on top, then maybe that would make the business go faster. So anyways, that's how but I remember that the first part was we sold our first couple customers. The first Klaviyo customer was a parking lot. It was not a Shopify business, not a retail business, period. It was a parking lot. And they wanted to check, it was one of the parking lots where you stopped paying with coins and started paying with software on your phone. And they just literally wanted to do analytics on like how many people were showing up to each location. And that was the first one. Now it turned out that was the only parking lot we ever sold. I think the next 10 customers were Shopify customers. Yeah. And then we knew we were onto something.
So we good old, parking lot to e-commerce pivot. Yeah.
yeah, it's a pretty normal chain of events.
But you said you started like, it wasn't the initial goal to build the marketing suite, or like just you came from databases. Like it was you built a database first and then built something on top of the database.
Yeah. So like to nerd out for a second, like having done stuff, I started my career, we were trying to do, machine learning, but on top of, big Dell boxes, Dell blades, and SQL Server licenses, which if anybody's ever done that, it's extraordinarily expensive. You have to literally go rack. This is before we had cloud, and it was just a huge pain. And like in trying to use SQL to implement, a regression algorithm is not pleasant. So I kind of grew up from that, and we spent a lot of time indexing data, like how do you store it, like on disk, and I think it's fascinating what's happened in the world of databases of this pulling apart storage from compute. But anyways, we had this idea that like, hey, look, there's going to be a future where we think a lot of like, Postgres or Maria or MySQL as these like relational data stores, for OLTP. But then there's like, well, then we also buy these data warehouses for OLAP, and like, well, why do I need these two abstractions? I mean, you get to a certain scale and you realize, my gosh, like a lot of the job is just making the data sync with each other, and like, what a pain. So we really just want to solve that problem of how to store and index stuff. And so that was like kind of my fascination. Because again, if you think about a brain, like it's got really low response times. But yeah.
So you were sitting on like technology that is like deeply appropriate for the problem domain, which you later on solved. But and after parking lot, you encounter e-commerce here, and by the way, I'm like enjoying this. Thank you very much for that. That's great. So at some point, then along the way, you were like writing against the Shopify like APIs, which I hope were not absolutely terrible at this point in time. Like,
no, they were awesome. Like I remember, so it was interesting. So our if you build a database. One of the things that we found when we first launched, this is 2012, we launched on Hacker News, like you do back in the day, with your show HN Post. And one of the challenges we ran into, we were two people, and we were bootstrapped, so we didn't have any funding. And we realized there were a bunch of other, like funded companies that were doing this kind of like analytics and store, customer data and this kind of stuff. I remember going to my co-founder, Ed, I'm like, Ed, how are we ever going to get any traction? Like they've soaked up all the oxygen. So our strategy was, we said, okay, well, a database is only as good as the data that's inside of it, and we'll build the connectors. So like, well, where are valuable data sets? And so a high school friend of mine had built a Shopify store, still has a Shopify store. I think he started their business maybe a year or two after us. So he's like 14 years old, all on Shopify. And so I was like, okay, we kind of need to be like Zapier. But we need to build all these integrations, so we need a way to make it really easy to connect. It's like one of the things that we believed was a lot of companies were building APIs, but nobody was kind of stitching them together. So if we could be the ones that kind of connected it, that was a problem a lot of folks had, especially non-technical folks. And we played with a lot of APIs, and what stuck out to me, and I think your hallmark all over this, Tobi, was one, it was like, wow, these are like beautifully designed. Like not just the UI is nice, but the actual APIs themselves are well thought out. This is coming from a world of, a lot of the other stuff we did was SOAP, and
I feel your pain.
yeah, and then some other horribleness. So having a consistent, great documentation, great APIs. And then the other thing that really stuck out is a lot of companies back then, and I give you guys all the credit for this, because I think a lot of people treated like APIs like, yeah, I'll put them out in the world, but then I won't really help the folks that want to build on it. And I think Shopify was really early to where there was actually someone at Shopify whose full-time job it was to help developers. I remember other folks I talked with, like, you'd ask them something like, hey, can we list what we built on your website? And they'd be like, yeah, sure. And that person would leave, go work on some other project. 6 months later, nothing had happened. And Shopify had like this whole self-serve flow of, yeah, you built something, oh great, we'll look at it, we'll review it, and boom, it's just, the concept of an app store was really early. So I think that we're like, well, this is, not only are there a lot of people, merchants here, but also this is like really a great community to build with.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I like, the amazing thing is we're now talking, like today, I mean, say what you want about the Shopify APIs, like us, we're working very hard on them. It's hard to know if for every aspect we have a best API, but I know that we absolutely have the most talent-dense app and developer ecosystem in the world of commerce on building on top of the system. And that's like, that's the best. Like this is, and it's the hardest, it's the hardest to build, and it's like, thanks to everyone in this room, and like it's absolutely awesome. You specifically have built one of the great success stories. We share the experience of starting companies that we want then take public later, which is like, yeah, people ask, I don't know how you feel about it. It's like, people always ask us, so what is it like to, become a public company? And my answer is always, and I think I actually might have told you the same thing when you were asked, like, it's not going to be in the top 10 hardest things you'll ever do. It may be in the top 10 most annoying things you'll ever do, but like the process actually is, funnily enough, is really like, makes you have to really explain your business, think about all the aspects of it, and so it actually becomes very, very valuable in this way. But it's also like a celebration and a milestone that's like notable. So. And we are cheering for you from our sort of vantage point, because again, we really do believe in this sort of the Gates line of like a platform is not a platform unless what's built on top is significantly more valuable than the people who create the platform. And I think you proved this out in a very wonderful way. Tell me about that experience and sort of the intervening years.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, I agree. Like, there's something. It's kind of annoying because sometimes you've kind of got the strategy in your head, and I don't know if you've had this experience where you're like, yeah, I know the answer, and like, why don't the rest of you know the answer? Like, we figured this out and we talked about it once, so we're done. Nothing like. I think the interesting part about being a public company is actually for folks that have done any kind of fundraising. What's interesting is a lot of like seed rounds now, they call them like party rounds or whatever. There's like a lot of people involved. So you're like, okay, so you're kind of finding a lot of folks that write small checks. And then I think in the middle years, you tend to pick like one venture capital firm, and you kind of pick one partner. And then you get to the public and it goes back to like, oh no, there's like people everywhere. And so you have to keep explaining yourself over and over. And it's not very hard, but it's not very intellectually stimulating.
Yeah, I mean, I really like automation. I mean, like look, if you ask me to do something once, cool, that's super interesting. The second time, I'm like, okay, but by the third time, I want to write a Ruby script to automate it, right? So like giving the same presentation like 100 times was grueling, to say the least. So yeah, I mean, I think that experience has gotten a little bit better in these days with like more acceptable to maybe send a video ahead, but like, yeah, we had to fly around anyways. It was a mess.
Yeah. Well, and I think, but your point on like discipline, I think is a good one because I think this like explaining yourself and getting good at that. I mean, it's a skill. And I've had people tell me, they're like, oh, the CEO title stands for Chief Explainer Officer. And it's like, oh, okay, so that's the rest of my life? Like, that doesn't sound as exciting as, being on the command line. But it's true, like, a lot of it is, there's, hundreds, thousands of people, whether internally or externally, that are like, hey, so what are we trying to do and what is the mission? And like I spent a lot of I actually think that's, I don't know how you think about it now with Shopify, like, I mean, not just a dev community, but a whole company. I mean, a big part of, I mean, I don't know how you've dealt with like feeling so a few steps removed from like actually, getting to write the code, right? I think we both like to indulge in like, okay, let's do some coding on the side. But it's weird, I don't know, it's a weird thing to work through other people.
Yeah, but you can accomplish incredible things if you can, right? Like so, the set of things that individuals can solve is just somewhat limited and pretty explored. I mean, in fact, what I think Shopify is attempting to do is actually increase that again. Like we're trying to build the most powerful APIs and toolkits so that the first engineer of a company or like the technical founder of a company can sit down and actually get really far into a prototype project at the very least. And I think that sort of wonderful world of LLMs is actually potentially going to bring up more, and even on the merchant side, we're hoping that things like Sidekick and you have a lot of AI projects as well, that it can be of advice. It can be like, again, literally a sidekick that's along with your heroic journey of reaching for independence and building a company. And you mentioned earlier that we built this sort of app store very early, and we did. We really built it a lot earlier than we presumably ought to have. Like there was. Like if you would have run the market analysis of like how many people would like an app store there to exist in which you can click on something and then it's in your Shopify store, it would have been zero because it's literally no app, like it just wasn't a thing. But Shopify really believes in markets. Like we really believe in just sort of a facility of capitalism and specifically supply and demand and how friction shapes it so much, and bringing, like we find that friction removal leads to both supply and demand increase on both sides. And so like we've done this early hoping that this will become valuable in the long run. And I think we are very fortunately, luck was a component of this too, somewhat merit, I hope, as well. And then it sort of came together. What is the chief explainer office comment is an interesting one. It's certainly, I mean, you're quite right that I got much better at explaining Shopify due to the repetition. But like it sort of maps a little bit to, I don't know. To me, there's like a sort of Harvard Business School, like your neck of the woods, fortune cookie comic sketch version of what CEOs do, which I don't think necessarily is like that good of a map, at least in my experience. Now, that might be me. So it is interesting to talk about the working through teams, but like I actually, it's not like I'm committing production code, but I work a lot with the engineering teams and the product teams, and I know you do too. And so I think that's actually an interesting thing to talk about. Like, come clean. Like, how much are you actually doing the stuff that the very serious people tell you ought to not be doing anymore?
Oh, all the time. I think generally,
exactly.
I think a good pattern is if they're telling you to not do it, they're probably right, but they're probably like 2 or 3 years too early.
Yeah.
So.
I'm still. I feel I'm pushing this 2 to 3 years further down the road every 2
10
to
years
3
later.
years. Yeah.
Well, actually, I was just sitting in the back and there's a true story. Like, going through some emails like with our product team about like, all right, so what are we going to do in the back half of the year? And look, I think there's 2 things. Like, one, I mean, you obviously want to get out of people's way, but if your company is about building products, then you have to stay close to that, and you have to stay close to the merchants or customers that are using them, and then you also have to set the tone that that's what it takes. I think one of the really sad things, at a lot of companies is like let's take the crafts of not so much engineering, 'cause I think that's a better one, but if you think of the craft of product, I mean that's a pretty new craft. Like that didn't, especially for say software, it didn't really exist 20 years ago, 30 years ago, at least as we now think of it, right? Digital form, rapid iteration cycles, and I think a lot of folks there's no book been written about that. There's no college curriculum yet that I know of. So a lot of that is just taught through, it's like an apprenticeship. So we talk a lot about that as like, hey, when we deeply review things, a lot of that is, I don't know, since we're again from Boston, there's like all these old pictures of Paul Revere. as like, and he was like, not only did he ride a horse, but like he also was like a silversmith. And it's like, so I used that picture of like, yeah, I mean, somebody had to train him up, and then he became the person, and then he trained the next person. And I've always loved jobs that frankly have that kind of craft apprenticeship mentality. And I think you want to try to work with people that take that approach, right? I mean, even for us, like constantly learning from people all the time, but also desperately trying to pay it forward to maximize what we can see in our lifetimes, like what Shopify can accomplish or Klaviyo can accomplish.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this somewhat European idea of exacting craftsmanship, I think it might be too much to state it as a European thing, but like I think sort of directionally is making a comeback now, because I actually really do think that across the technology industry, we're starting to like just realize how the sort of like the full-on systematizing of our industry that was sort of attempted has led to not the desired results. It's just like it's just software crafting is just it's more of an exploration into the unknown rather than like operationalizing some kind of widget factory in a better way, but like because that's a known, understandable problem that there's a map for, and there is a best way to presumably do this, although I don't think you can quite reach it. It's a different exercise. It's more like it's a foggy exploration of a map that no one has really actually fully mapped out in most cases. Sometimes it's not, and then you act accordingly. But I think the default should be that we really celebrate exacting craftsmanship, in terms of, like, you've all seen the presentation on stage this morning. We talk a lot about, and just even now, we talk a lot about milliseconds for performance, and because that is how the craft of the engineering actually expresses itself. Like, this is something that the engineering team can contribute that goes beyond any of the spec sheets for the product. And I think what I always say in this is that not all fast products are great products, but all great products are fast. And I mean, this was a differentiating feature for you right from the beginning. I mean, this is like your priors are like this database, like, but literally is proprietary, that is at the foundation of a product you're creating, and that allowed you to take what you built much, much further than what contemporaries were doing in other places.
Yeah. Yeah, well, one is one of our favorite XKCDs to pass around is that one that has a little chart of here's how much it costs, here's how long it would take to automate, and like here's when you should do that. So it's like a dumb, simple graph, but like, boy, we love that. It's like, okay, if you're doing something 5 minutes a day, like you should probably be willing to spend a week to get rid of it out of your life. But yeah, on product strategy, when we are talking about that as a team, we do this little exercise before we build out like a roadmap, like what do you want to go build, and what's your vision for the future. And so part of that I think is pretty rote stuff. Like we'll do this thing where we'll go through our own products, and I always make the analogy of like, it's like, imagine somebody was constructing a house and you're about to move into it or whatever, and so it's got all the things, but there's always like, there's paint that's missing a little bit, or there's like some loose nails. So we go through and we're like, okay, let's just annotate all the rough edges, and let's just go find those in catalog. And that's very straightforward. And then I think you also go out in the world and you explore like, other products that people might use that might be competitive, but we use the term alternative because I think oftentimes the thing that people are doing is, it could be like a spreadsheet. So those two are pretty straightforward. But then, so you do those, and that's kind of like, that's very straightforward. You can do that. You can almost turn your brain off while you're doing it because it's so, it can be somewhat robotic. But then there's the third part, which we're like, okay, I firmly believe every product category, if you fast forward 5, 10 years, we'll look at today's product, that product, and say like, oh, it's obsolete.
Yeah.
It's funny, like, I mean, we're both old enough. Like, I remember when we had, phones that had, were attached to the wall, and cordless phones were a thing, and then flip phones were a thing, and then the smartphone came along, and you're like, oh, well, those are over. And so even that part of our life, like that little computer we keep in our pockets, in 10 years, it's actually, that one has had a pretty long run. Like, it probably will be obsolete in 10 years, and maybe not, but anyway, so we like to think of every product category, there's gonna be a 2.0 or an N+1 version. And so we'll say like, okay, so what could that be? And a lot of that is, okay, well, what technology exists and how could you apply it? But an evergreen strategy, I tell everybody, it's like, if you can't figure things out, you can always just make something faster. And that will always be a winning strategy because humans will always, they'll pay for something, they'll try something if you could just shave seconds or even milliseconds off the use case.
Absolutely. So performance is again winning strategy. At least part of the book of a winning strategy. Let's talk about strategy. Again, 2 to 10. It sounds like the next 9 were like e-commerce. A lot of the next ones also. You had lots of choices, directions to go. A lot of companies that are your alternatives, to use your term, rivals, I suppose. I also really don't like competitors. I think we should talk about zero-sum positives at some point. Maybe we are getting there. Is just come to us and build anything you want. And you said, well, you know what, retail, right? Let's go for e-commerce. And due to this choice, thank you very much. We became really great fellow travelers and addressing different aspects of the same thing. But how did this choice come, and how did you think about it? And we should talk about the obvious risks there that you might have considered.
Yeah, sure. So I think we've always looked at it as again, our belief was okay, we're gonna be able to take ourselves, plug it into a server, and then give it to the world. So in the not too distant future, if you want one-on-one coaching from Tobi or anybody on his team, that will exist. And you may open source that may be, but anyways, that will exist. And that's a crazy thing to think about, is imagine getting an apprenticeship with somebody that you really admire, and it's yeah, they're there 24/7 whenever you need them, and they've got all, they can give them whatever context, and off you go. That seems kind of obvious now with LLMs, but it didn't
honestly,
years ago.
Literally everyone who works for me is completely distressed by what you just said.
Well, you can also choose to power it down, I guess, if you want. Yeah, it's an optional. It's an optional. Optional mentor. But anyways, so for us, it was okay, so we're built generically, and then you have to pick a market. And I remember my co-founder, our original Klaviyo website said, it was something something for all your customer analytics and all your messaging in one place, right? It was we'll take those two categories and we'll kind of mash them together. And Ed came and he's I really think we should put on the tin that we have this customer quote that was other products are for opens and clicks, and Klaviyo's for making money, and we're oh, that's a really good quote. And it's I think we should put that on the website. I'm yeah, but it's gonna be so retail focused. But at the time, we were growing with Shopify a ton, and we thought we had these discussions. We meet every Friday and have these, have it out about big topics. And it was always well, is there risk around that? And it's yeah, we kind of felt that way, but one of the things I admire about Shopify, and we also just, personal confidence, was look, at the end of the day, customers, merchants deserve the best products, and the best products should win. And the reality is the search space for great products is effectively infinite. There's just so many directions to go that, if you feel you can conquer them all, I don't know about you, but I've definitely been guilty of oh yeah, let's do all 100 of these things, and you realize that's actually not a good number. You probably should focus a little bit. And so then it's okay, well, so it's not really zero sum. It's well, how do you decide who to work with? And I've always looked at partnerships, how, you need, it's probably not the best analogy, because I've always looked at two people pulling on a string, almost like tug of war, but it's not competitive. It's you need two, sources of force to keep the string tight, so to make it worth it. And we always looked at it as okay, if you can find other people, other companies that you share similar values with, attention to the craft, and have a high bar, and then there's some mutual benefit. So in our case, it's okay, well, I think we both believe that helping merchants grow independently, where they have ownership over that, is great. We want them to be more successful and have a clear path. If we can both work towards that, it's a win-win. But in the back of our heads, we're also look, we have to be awesome builders. And I think if you are great at that craft, then that's what keeps you from, I don't know, getting disrupted.
The elephant in the room there, I imagine when you talk with analysts, so people new come to it, is this the question of platform risk, though, which is our industry has talked a lot, and I'm sure it's on everyone's mind. Talk me through how you, how do you think about platform risk? Asking for a friend.
Yeah, yeah. Like I said, we just, it's not, it's not, I think it's, if you feel good about what you're delivering for customers and you've got folks that have like-minded values, I don't think there's really that much risk there. Or let's say, there's risk in anything you do. But the other thing you do, we were just, students of history. So the other thing is if you're building a business, a major cheat code, if you can't like literally go work at a company, is to just study companies from the past. Yeah. And you look at all these companies that have been super successful building with others. One of our favorite examples is there's a company, Viva, that's in the clinical trial space, and it's like entirely built on top of Salesforce, which is like kind of shocking, but also like true. And we look at that as like, oh, well, there's an example, and that's, there's tons of, it's in some sense like everybody has a dependency on something, and so you look at like, well, what part of the stack do you want to be great at? And then I think you just have to have open conversations with the folks you work with, and we do the same thing with folks integrating into Klaviyo. Like, here's the parts that we want to be great at. What parts do you want to be great at? And that's, I think, where you can get this better together, and it's not really zero sum.
Yeah. There's a fantastic book called iPencil, which is like, I don't know if you encountered this. It's like the entire book, which is just like, here is in reverse the entire process of making a pencil, like including getting graphite from the ground. It's just like, the entire book is just like, you realize, oh my God, like we are all, like everyone who thinks they're completely independent really has not read iPencil. So that's definitely the conclusion. It's interesting. Yeah.
Let me make one other point too, though. Like the other thing that we attribute a lot of Klaviyo's success to is, I think even if you build a great product, unfortunately, the answer is still like people won't just show up. I think we've talked about the past, because I think we were asking like, Tobi, like, where did you find all the customers in the early days? I think one of the things with SaaS, one of our beliefs was, when businesses or end customers, merchants, are building their business, they'll tend to pick like the best of breed software that solves their problems. And it's actually really smart to think about like that creates these kind of de facto communities. There are so many merchants that like love Shopify or love the leader in a space. And so you could just go run a lot of ads or go call a lot of folks. But actually, you kind of get this unfair advantage if you realize like where people hang out, either in IRL or online. And one of the things we've always believed is like, well, actually, platforms are a great way to grow, period, because there's these de facto communities, and a lot of people don't pay attention to them. And so there's a lot of marketing is just arbitrage. It's going where other folks aren't. And we looked at that as like that was just a big unfair advantage when we started.
Yeah, our industry, tech industry, just talks a lot about, the platform risk. But one of the interesting things is when you look at where it comes from, right? Like a lot of the ink got spilled on the experience of companies that ended up building on Facebook, which created an incredibly sort of permissive like platform, but almost immediately everyone who built on top of it kind of. If you think about a platform relationship a little bit like sort of an iterated prisoner's dilemma, if you ever study this kind of thing, like always cooperating. Like tit for tat is really the winning strategy, but start with cooperating and then just like do it many steps, get the most points on all sides. In their experience, like everyone basically defected immediately. Like Zynga just pushed everyone out, took everyone out of Facebook to spend time on like whatever you do with animals on farms, like these flash games. And so, it ended up like the use cases end up being rivalrous to what Facebook wanted, right? Like it's like that was not exactly in the interest of that company. So they eventually had to change their strategy to a platform. And the cool thing here, and what I think we all do here, is like we are all like hey, same team, same project. We're all like we're all trying to push from behind to incredible entrepreneurs who are building like world-challenging businesses, and we all make them look better. And that's kind of the point. And we should like make sure that's the main point. We are like why we're showing up. So I think this is I think why it works really well. Another aspect of this, in a strategic sense, I wonder if you agree with this. I just I admire your sort of counter. Like most people, I'm not willing to do this. Just your willingness to leave hedging, leave it aside when it's extremely valuable to just like commit. Like hedging is extremely expensive if you think about it. The financial types often don't think about it like this, because they are trying, like if you're doing stocks or whatever, it's better to build a balanced portfolio because it's super hard to pick winners. It's somewhat unpredictable in certain cases, and the downside risk is a margin call, so you get wiped out, so the downside risk is higher. In product building, it's kind of the opposite. It's like, cool, if you get picked wrong, you just like adjust. But if you pick right, holy hell, you build something really meaningful together. And so the equation is kind of flipped in my mind. You want to take the other side on that argument, or like?
Yeah, no, I definitely. Well, it's a little bit also like, what's the, I don't know, it's a little psychological, like what's the, philosophical, what's the life you want to live? We have this motto inside of Klaviyo that's, we're always 1% done. And the reason is, like, I had this mental model of, like, when I had a computer when I was young, and used to order software by, literally would come in like like an envelope with a bunch of floppy disks, and you'd put them in one by one, and you'd watch the progress bar go over. Mm-hmm. And when you got towards the end, you'd start to get really nervous about screwing anything up, like make sure the power cord's plugged in, all this kind of stuff. And I always feel like it's kind of a good analogy for anything you're trying to tackle. And when you get to like 50% complete, you start to say like, oh man, my best work is behind me, there's actually not much left. And so we've always tried to take this approach of like, well, if you just started, you're sort of not that precious about what you've got. And that's like a wonderful way to, encourage just risk-taking. It's interesting. I think a lot of us are, we're entrepreneurs, so this is sort of natural to us of like, yeah, of course I'll take that risk. But that's not normal for a lot of folks. A lot of folks will say, oh, no. Once something gets kind of big enough, like, we've really got to protect it. And that's probably, I mean, look, there's probably there's easy things to do to avoid risk. But in general, like, I think what's more interesting is like, okay, well, how could we 10x or 100x this thing? And that forces you to dream big. And then all of a sudden, nothing seems that bad. And I know, I don't know, probably we as software folks, we probably self-select too. It's just more fun to build. And there's so much leverage. I don't know, another thought exercise we often do is, when we started Klaviyo, I had this belief that I was like, okay, we're gonna work our butts off building this, but in 5 years, everything we've built, somebody will be able to build in like a week, because the tooling will just be so good, all this kind of stuff. I don't know if that's quite come true, but what's your take on this, hey, look, the pace is going faster, so in some sense, you have to force yourself in this mindset of, well, how do we dream bigger and go faster towards it? Because if we don't, then, I don't know, somebody else will.
Yeah, I mean, I think about this a lot. I'm in awe of the tools you get to use to work with, and I think of myself as a tool maker through and through, right? Like I was a kid who fixed the network when we did network parties as teenagers. Like I figured out which, I've always kind of built the infrastructure for everyone else to have their fun. It's like, hello everyone, it's great to have you. This fits me perfectly in my self-identity, and I think about this inside of Shopify too. I am much more happy about a project, and we do this a lot, where yes, we could sort of build on what we have, or like in from the side, we could add a feature. And frankly, there was a period in Shopify's history where this actually happened quite a bit. We could sort of add something in just to be able to now have this thing. And we would spend a lot of time making bendings, building over here and hoping it's like structural enough to survive and not flip over. I want to actually build infrastructure, raise the floor, and then build the feature in a week now. That's like, I'm very clear on this. This is much better. It takes longer, but then you're on solid foundations, and frankly, tomorrow matters. Like, you have to take a long-term focus. And so, increasingly though, and that's the beautiful thing, and why this is actually valuable, because as I said, like, this takes a lot longer, therefore it's slower, therefore it should be a problem. No, it isn't, because here's the thing about infrastructure. Infrastructure is composable. And composability can save you unbelievable amounts of time. This is literally why we try to unify everything and so on now. So you see, like, the external strategy of Shopify is the internal strategy, and we believe in the unreasonable compounding returns of investment on infrastructure work very, very strongly. And I do think that it's almost the ideal strategy to not build any feature unless you can build in a week, and stop if you can't, and just go back and fix the infrastructure so you could.
Totally. Well, I think we're probably in unique positions where I talk to our engineers, like, if some system is like, it's paging a lot or whatever, it's almost like, go fix that first. Yeah. Always, because I mean, we both sat in that spot. Maybe one of the notes, to your point on infrastructure, I think one of the most amazing things you can do as a product person is build a primitive that folks sort of just adopt as like a universal truth. Like you think about, like I don't know, ride hailing or like Uber and Lyft. It's like hey, go to point A, point B. It's like that's just a primitive now that exists in the world. I mean, how do you think about that when it comes to product strategy? Do you think about things like, I don't know, building a great checkout experience? I mean, a lot of us say, oh, that's not really very sexy. You think about the ability to facilitate, the transfer of like dollars in exchange for a good as efficiently and as delightfully as possible. Like that can get used billions of times a year. How do you think about that of like, hey, your mark on the world will be, I introduce these primitives that now are just universal?
Yeah, I think, I mean, for me personally, it's like, I'm like maniacal on the like lowest level details of the pieces of infrastructure to bring them up to a point, but then I actually stop caring about anything up to a very high level of abstraction, which is sort of bizarre. But like the primitive or my impact on the world, I just like my personal mission, which is utterly aligned with Shopify because I got to had the pleasure of building the company, is I just want to cause more entrepreneurship to be in a world like. That's it. Like I just think entrepreneurship is amazing. It's completely load-bearing for all economies, and it's just under-celebrated. It's deeply courageous. It is it's a form of self-expression. It is I think it's a glorious pursuit for people, and I think society doesn't like celebrate it enough. In fact, it's actually very often. Maybe you had this experience too, and maybe some people here can relate. When you say, I'm going to reach for independence, I'm going to do this myself, I'm making my plan C for my career, my plan A, or any of these kind of phrases, when you are setting out to build a company, I think most people around you will try to talk you out of it. Because and I think the reasons are fairly selfish, because it's like, I think people will then have to kind of rearrange their own idea, like hierarchy stack, and say, man, I should probably have done this thing I wanted to do. I think that's the main motivator. I feel that's too bad, and we see entrepreneurship rates go down. I think the youngest generation is more entrepreneurial again than maybe previous, so hopefully this is bending as a curve. Partly because I think we're all watching Mr. Beast growing up, and there's like a lot of that kind of energy, and that's actually really good for, I think, everyone. Think what you may about the particular content of the videos. So I think that's interesting. My sense is like I would like to just push the big topic here and none of the things around it. Like it's just like it's a big topic alone and it's worthy of a focus of a career.
Yeah, you had this picture, I think, from Unite a couple years ago, where you drew this like graph, and it was like how hard is entrepreneurship, and it kind of goes up to the right, and it's like it's a steep hill, and then shallowing that out. And I've shared that graphic a lot because I think it's a good one. You probably had this experience too, but like I grew up, I was very close with my grandmother, and when she was growing up, color TV had just been invented. And now she does like video chats with her grandkids like on a phone. And it's like I think about like, wow, like to see all that technological process, progress. One of the things we talk about is like, man, it would just be fun to see a lot of great stuff exist in our lives. But that technology is not going to create itself. Like somebody has to step up and be creative and be entrepreneurial to go do it. And so if if your goal is like, hey, I just want to see a lot of more interesting stuff, very selfish. Literally, you just need a lot more people to try.
Yes.
And so providing the infrastructure for that is huge. Because like you said, if you lower the barrier, all of a sudden, it's like I think there was a study with Uber in New York City. It turns out it didn't really cannibalize the cabs, or it did a little bit, but actually just increased the number of like ride shares that folks did overall. Yeah. And I think the same thing's here. You lower the barrier, and all of a sudden you realize the market's actually much, much, much larger than you thought it was.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like the supply demand, like it's friction which causes it. There's probably more of both if it wouldn't just be so annoying to address or so Byzantine to get through. What excites you now? What's the next thing? What are you looking forward to? What are you tinkering with?
Well, so it's interesting, all the stuff around like language models and generative AI recently, because we've tried to get rid of the hype part of artificial intelligence. I mean, you can put it in your marketing, but like try to dumb it down and make it less sexy. So you sort of really have to focus on.
Yeah, the utilitarian side of it is like underexplored. I would
Yeah,
say.
so anyways, we tried, we started to refer to it more as AI internally, but actually it was bad for a while because we just didn't use the term AI because it felt too buzzwordy. But well, anyways, it's interesting about this topic of craft, right? Because it feels like this unknowable thing. Like, what is it? I don't know. You can only kind of learn it through experience. So one of our beliefs, one of my personal beliefs, is I think everything we do as humans, like there are algorithms that govern that, and those algorithms are like fundamentally discoverable. And they may be really complicated and hard to understand, but I think a lot of people say like, oh no, you could never figure that out. Like that's only humans can do that. And I think we find time and time again for increasingly complex tasks, that's not true. So we have these like, kind of three axioms of like, ML, and AI at Klaviyo. One is that like you can discover the routines that we use to make decisions in our lives. So like they are there to be discovered. Two, once you actually discover them, for the most part, we're mostly, we weren't born with them. Like we're figuring them out as we go. And our algorithms are actually pretty naive. Like they're actually not that great. So as an example, like, one thing I ask a lot of our customers, Klaviyo, is like, hey, what's your algorithm for marketing? Like literally when you log into our software, how do you decide which buttons to click and what to go spend time on? And a lot of folks get this kind of sheepish grin of like, well, I don't know, I'm kind of making it up, or I learned before this works. So, but they're willing to admit they don't know the answer. So if you believe that the algorithm is kind of naive, it's probably likely that with data we can make it a lot better. And then, the third axiom for us is like, I think that doesn't necessarily, it probably, it makes some tasks, go to zero or very small, but there's fundamentally more that like humans will just build on top of that, right? Like more progressively harder and harder tasks. So I think that's actually, it's cool to see the tech that's come out recently because I think now, discovering those algorithms is a really interesting thing. Figuring out how to make them better is really interesting. And then obviously that provides some of the infrastructure we're talking about. Then like, okay, well, what are the higher order tasks that now somebody can free themselves up to go do?
Very good. Very exciting. Well, thanks for joining us, and it's like this is a pleasure. And again, congratulations to everything you built, and again to everyone here. Also, thank you for me for everything you built. Like 20 years ago, there was basically nothing on the internet worth doing, and everyone that I knew who hung out on the internet was builders. We knew that this is going to be important, and we just didn't know exactly what it's going to look like. Many of us sat down to starting to like, hey, build the things that we felt were missing, and this was one of the pleasures of my career has been like to find such a community early that like inspired me to just like reach for independence myself and have like a high agency impact on the internet, build some of it what we want to see. In a lot of ways, Shopify kind of keeps the vision of the early 2000s of the open internet alive, with people having their own brands and own sites and these kind of things. And the e-commerce corner is such a wonderful place to do this. So that's my privilege I get to live in. The most gratifying of this is like 20 years later, we basically ported this wonderful thing to a larger scale on the platform that came out of this. I feel like we are like a direct sort of like improved descendant of like the early discoveries of these kind of times, and I just think it's so neat getting to like talk to so many of you today about like the sort of optimism and there's just so much high agency thought. There's so much optimism for the future. There's so much can do and let's go build. I love that about the community, and let's never leave this. And also just like sometimes appreciate just how special this is. And so for that, for me, thank you. And again, Andrew, pleasure to get to welcome you on stage, and hope you have a wonderful day and after party and all these kind of good things. Thank you.
Thanks. That was fun.
Super good.